Hello there, BookTube. My name is Daniel. Welcome back to my channel, Guilty Feet. I've got no rhythm. One of the joys of being a reader, having been a reader for a number of years, is my experience of seeing how things connect, of the aggregative power of stuff that I've read feeding into things that I am reading or will read. I'm inspired to read books by books that I've read. I understand illusions in books that I've read because of things that I'm reading because of things that I've read. I think about, well, I need to find out about that in a future book because of something I'm reading. It's all connected. I love that. I think that's part of the reason why I read a lot of series, whether genre or even literary fiction. I don't mind somebody writing a series of books featuring the same characters, or a biography over a number of volumes. Whatever it is, I love that sense of building on the past. And when it crosses from one generation to the next, from one century to the next, also I find that very invigorating, and that's sort of what I get out of reading. Examples in the book world of books that are alluded to by other books, or books that inform other books. I've spoken, I think, before about my love for Neil Gaiman's The Graveyard Book. I think it's my favorite of his prose works, and of course it exists only because we have Rudyard Kipling's The Jungle Books. I know Kipling is terribly out of fashion. I've read a bunch of his stuff, and The Jungle Books is absolutely delightful from start to finish. If you know the basic story of Mowgli and being brought up in the jungle, but so these stories are wonderful, and so is The Graveyard Book. I like how one informs the other and enriched my experience of the other. In that case, in that instance, I read The Jungle Books first and came to The Graveyard Book afterwards. I studied King Lear at school for my A-levels, and was very involved with this man, more sinned against than sinning. Let me be not mad. And he was kind of bonkers. And then his what he does with his children. So that when I came to Pulitzer Prize winner Jane Smiley's 1,000 Acres, I understood what this was alluding to and what the story was, and the fact this is a standalone novel but retelling the story of King Lear enriched my experience with this book. And all this is to get to a book that I read fairly recently, but just before I do that, I need to talk all the way about the background where I first started. When I was 18, I came to Israel for a couple of years after I finished school in London, before I went back to university in London. And a good friend of my mother's, Susan, suggested that I read this book and gave it to my mum, who sent it to me or somehow got it to me. Sorry, Susan, I've still got your copy of Rabbit Run by John Updike, with a rather lurid pencil-drawn cover. Doesn't say cover drawing by Milton Glaser. Shame on you, Milton. But this is the old Penguin paperback, originally published. I need to put my glasses on to see when this was published. So the book is from 1960. This seems to be published 64. Is that possible? First, is this the original paperback book edition in the UK? Maybe. This revised edition, published in Penguin Books, is 1964. Okay, so I read Rabbit Run. I'm not going to show you the cover again. There's a lovely old picture of John Updike in his prime. And this is my introduction to Rabbit. I read one John Updike before this, I think Roger's version, which was a later novel. It disappeared. I don't have it in my library. So this got me into Rabbit, and Harry Angstrom, as he's known, and he's called Rabbit because of his tremendous winning performances in high school basketball. So I learned that there was a series of books. At the time I read this, there were 2 sequels, and I went out to find the second sequel. So this was originally published in 1960. The second book was published about 10 years later, and that book was called Rabbit Redux. Again, we still got the same pencil drawn, but this time it's John Updike. It's pencil drawn. Unless that's definitely Updike. That's not supposed to be Harry Angstrom. And this was Rabbit Redux. Actually, my least favorite, I think, of all the Rabbit stories, because this was very confusing to me. This comes back 10 years later. This is set sort of post Summer of Love. Rabbit has left his wife, and it has some radical Black Panther type living with him, and there's some race relations and class issues here, and it kind of went over my head a little bit. But this is the edition. So I was in seminary. I was in yeshiva. I'm studying my second year here, and so I bought this. You can just about make out that is a shop called Sefer V'Sefel, it says in there, which in Hebrew means sefer is a book and sefer is a mug. This is a shop that still exists, still around in Jerusalem. So I bought this in 1989, so 30 to 33 years ago. The shop is still around, Sefer, I believe, in Jerusalem. I don't think the Sefer part was a cafe, so it was a bookshop and a cafe. I don't think they're serving anymore, but it's still, the shop is still a bookshop, second-hand bookshop. I don't know. See, this was marked R because that way they could change the prices by a signed letter. I wouldn't have paid very much for this at all. Maybe 3 or 4 shekel for a second-hand copy, and they've scratched out of it just in case you were worried that you were overpaying. They scribbled out the original prices. So read that when I was there. Didn't love it so much, but being a sort of nerdish completist, I went out and bought. I think also from Sefer Sefer. Let's see. Yes, also Sefer V'Sefer. So this would have been. This is February '89. Maybe I bought these together. When was this one? No, January '89. So after I've read this, I've gone back to the same shop and got the third, the Pulitzer Prize winning third in the trilogy, Rabbit is Rich, which was tremendous. Jump forward a few years later, I'm back in London studying, and I'm not sure if she was my girlfriend at that point or maybe my ex-girlfriend. I am pretty sure that she's now my wife and has been for about 30 years. But she bought me, as one of the first gifts my now wife bought me. And this was the hardback edition of the brand new, the 4th in the series, Rabbit at Rest. John Updike's 4th Rabbit book. Also won the Pulitzer Prize, I believe. So this edition, this may be a first UK edition in terrible condition, all yellowed, and it's been sitting on my shelf for all this time. A sign. Oh no, this Portland's novel appeared in paper. First published 1990. I don't know. No way of knowing this is a first UK edition, but this is from the UK in 1990 when it was published. So we had 1960, 1970, 1980. Every 10 years he published one of these books, and this was the 4th and last of the books. As you can tell from the title, Death of a Salesman. Americans love putting the spoiler in the title, Rabbit at Rest. At the end of this book, we see Rabbit's demise. But no, John Updike, who was still around, having written these 4 books over 3.5 decades, and sometime after that, he published a sequel, which is in this collection, Licks of Love. There is a long novella. It's a few hundred pages. 1 second. Rabbit Remembered at 177 to almost 200-page. So it could have been a novel in its own right called Rabbit Remembered, where we revisit the memory of Rabbit, his family, Janice, and his idiot son, and Nelson, I believe, yes. And so this, I think, was the last we were to hear of Rabbit. Okay, all this is to say, let's go back to number 2. All this is to say, the second, when I read Rabbit Run, I went out and bought Rabbit Redux. And, I all like to do research and try and find out why the hell is it called Rabbit Redux? Well, it's not a word in common usage, Redux. And of course, this was an allusion to a book that I read that in 1989. This was an allusion to a book that I eventually read 32 years later that had been written some 120, 130 years previously. So I just recently read Phineas Redux by Anthony Trollope. It all comes together. Okay. Updike was alluding to the return of Phineas Finn, who we first met in his titular book, Phineas Finn by Anthony Trollope. Okay, just to tell you where we are in terms of this Trollope. So this is, I read the whole of the Barchester Chronicles, which were 6 novels starting with The Warden, which I think Mark from Booktime and Elvis and Steve Donoghue are reading right now, so you can go over and see them. Maybe I'll link to some of their work on The Warden. The Warden is a beautiful, like around 200 pages, a great introduction, a wonderful, wonderful novel, kind of tricks you into thinking that all the subsequent books are going to be these lovely pastoral 200-page things. They get a bit more vicious and considerably longer. I think the rest of the books average out at around 700-800 pages. But The Warden is a fabulous place to start, and it builds up. It doesn't just go from 200 to 800, but by the end, 800, and then it becomes when we get to the Palliser novels. So I read that whole series, Barchester Chronicles, 6 books, and then this is a separate series, loosely connected series called the Palliser novels. where some of the characters, I think some of the characters who were in the Berkshire Chronicles show up here, particularly the Duke of Omnium, and this was the first of those, Can You Forgive Her, which Trollope back in the 19th century named after the famous Pet Shop Boys song, and which was so another allusion, this time from pop music back to Victorian literature, a great pop song by the great Pet Shop Boys, and that was going every time I picked this up when I was reading this, I read that. So that was a great start to a new series, and we go from there to Phineas Finn. Phineas Finn is a gentleman from Ireland at a time when Ireland was not independent of the rest of Great Britain, so would send members of Parliament to London to represent constituencies in the place now, which is the Independent Republic of Ireland. And he comes to London as a newly elected member of Parliament and wants to make his way in politics. At that time, when you're at the lowest level as a member of Parliament, you have no income. You serve at the request of the people, and you need to find other ways to make an income. And so it's Phineas in particular is torn by his desire to serve and do good and participate in the politics of the day, but also his need, because he is not a man of wealth. He manages to raise the necessary funds to run for Parliament, to make it to London, but he needs to find ways to generate income. One of the ways of doing that is by moving up through the ranks of your party. Eventually you get appointed. There are certain jobs within the government for which there is a stipend attached. But in order to do that, you need to toe the line, you need to do the right things, to turn up to the right places, impress the right people, and then maybe you will be appointed to a position, a secretarial position or a junior ministry position, where you would earn some money. This is a great book. I have I didn't study a lot of history. All the history I get is from literature. This was a great introduction to politics in the UK in the 1840s, 50s, I believe. It's satirizing much of the time, and if that's what you're interested in, you can go and see the exact parallels between the different parties and the leaders and who they're supposed to represent, and understand Trollope's politics at the time. I'm in it for the love stories and the outrage and the scandal and all that, and this was jolly good fun. And by the end of it, Phineas is a broken and beaten man. He returns to Ireland, to his first love, after being involved in many intrigues in the social circles of London, and eventually retires back to Ireland, chastened by his experience, no longer a member of Parliament, and having to settle for a simpler life. After Phineas Finn, we get the Eustace Diamonds. So we've left Phineas behind, and now we have a separate story, but in the same milieu. And this is a story about a woman who's a bit of a gold digger, and she marries up, and then her husband dies, and his estate is supposed to be passed on to his family, to male heirs, or to stay in the family, and she, as his widow, is trying to extract as much of it as she can, including the diamonds of the title, which she wore while she was his wife, but need to be returned to the state following his death. And there's much dispute about what happens to them. Are they stolen? Were they stolen? Did she steal them? Did she arrange to have them stolen? And lots of intrigue, a bit of the usual undercurrent of anti-Semitism. Trollope would never let a good book go without finding some Jew to demonize, and he does that there. And the ending, Lizzie Eustace gets a kind of comeuppance at the end. She's shunned mostly by society, and finds one man for whom she is still a step up, and he marries her, and he is, of course, despicable in many ways. That's why she's an improvement for him, because he's a Jew, and he's the worst kind of Jew, because he's a Jew pretending not to be a Jew, and he's now a Christian preacher, and we get a lot of that, greasy, slimy Levantine. Trollope loves to hit those beats. That's the Eustace Diamonds, great, and then we finally get the fourth in the series, is the one that I read recently, which is Phineas Redux. So that was the point of this whole everything preamble, 15-minute preamble up till now, talk about how I got 30 years ago from Rabbit Redux to Phineas Redux. And the reason why I decided to do a whole preamble is because of the nature of this book itself, where the Jew from the previous Eustace Diamonds comes back in this and is even more terrible than we had possibly imagined. So just to recap the story, Phineas comes back as you hoped he would. So we left him at the end of Phineas Finn back in Ireland, marrying his first true love, a much simpler relationship than these ones he's almost had, and the women he fell in love with, and the complications of his life in London. He ends back in Ireland with this lovely young Irish bride, and by the start of Phineas Redux, she's died, young, tragically young, and of course, so he gets a second chance to come back to London and make his case again, and then immediately pick up all these relations and romantical intrigues that he'd been involved in the first time around. Many of whom, they've been ruined, their lives have been scandalous, and marriages have broken up, and all sorts of things happen. And so the first half of this book, there's a lot of retread of what we did before in the first book. But as I say, those are the parts that I'm here for. That kind of entertaining, romantic, Victorian stuff with a bit of political, court intrigue, as it were, in terms of the politics of the day and what he's learned from his first time round trying to be a politician, and how he applies that now in his time, whether he should speak about this, how to get ahead, how obvious you have to be about wanting that job and the things you have to say. He comes up against people who take a dislike to him because he's honestly an endearing chap, and the women are all crazy about him. The whole thing about Phineas Finn is wherever he goes, all the women adore him. He never seems to me to be particularly bright or witty or a man of any particular integrity. He's supposed to be tall and handsome and knows how to talk to men and women, but he's a bit of a nothing, an empty character in which we put our own hopes and ambitions. Again, so there's some intrigue, and with this woman that he originally had fallen in love with, who denied him because she had to marry in order to save her brother, and now she's been in this horrible marriage, and is madly in love with him, but he can't go back to her. Anyway, there's that going on. There's another relationship going on with a widow, who it's also mentioned that she may be a bit of a Jew, and that's like kind of a black mark on her, but she's so lovely and wonderful that we think of her. And about halfway through this book, there's a murder. So one of the politicians who did not love Phineas, so almost everyone loves Phineas, there's a guy who didn't love him and thought Phineas, he was out to get him a little bit, and he gets murdered. And it's literally halfway through the book, there's a whole change in pace, and this maybe is suggestive of how these things were written, how such a book was written in series. And Trollope would sit down and write thousands of words every day, and these would be released in monthly, weekly magazines, or whatever, monthly magazines, I guess. I don't know. Anyway, I'm not a Trollope scholar, so apologies. But halfway through, he decides to go in a whole different direction. There's a murder, and Phineas is a suspect, while he's a member of Parliament, I believe. And the whole thing, he goes on trial, and he's this, and the women of his life rush to defend him, and the woman who's in love with him, and the other one who can save him, and the Duke's wife, Palliser. They're called the Palliser novels. So the what's his name, Plantagenet Palliser, becomes the Duke, and his wife, who's the most delightful character across all these series, is trying to save his skin. And who did it? Who's the real criminal here? He's also, by the way, so Phineas gets arrested, but the other guy also gets arrested, but he's got an alibi. It's that bloody Jew again. Trollope just going after, and the demonic, devious, now murderous Jew. How do we manage to convince the world that he was the real criminal and not our beloved Phineas Finn? And that's what plays out here. So Phineas Redux, another 800-900 page book that I just love these things, despite Trollope's anti-Semitism, despite the sort of weird, lingering, repetitive, romantic nature of these things, despite the arcane delving into the British political system and what you have to do and who you have to bribe and where you have to go and how much money it costs in order to get elected and which constituency and how they then close down the constituency, you have to stand somewhere else. A lot of and I just lapped it up. So I would say a solid B+ for an entry in another one of Trollope's books, a classic F- for persistent anti-Semitism, and I'm here for the next one, which I already have. The fifth in the Palliser series is the Prime Minister. I'll get to that probably later this year. Again, it's another 800 plus page book. For some reason, it's in two parts. So I get one in this edition. I don't know why they do this. This edition goes all the way up to page 464 and then starts again from 0 to 464 plus another 464. That's 920 bloody pages. But they're all right. So this is the Prime Minister. I don't know if we're going to see much of Phineas in this. And then the last one, I believe, is called The Duke's Children, which I'll probably do next year. And then when I've finished, so I've done 4 of the 6 Palliser novels. And then I think I'll go and read some of the standalone trollops, because he's an abominable, Jew-hating scumbag. But I do enjoy his books. And that's it. So that was my time. 20 minutes, lots of talking. Not sure I said much. God bless. Have a great weekend. Bye.